And we are in chapter 6. Anybody have any questions or observations, anything about anything we've covered so far? We've got to get through the rest of this book quickly, but that doesn't mean we want to skip anything. We can learn something good about it. How do you feel about our study so far? Do you feel better about your knowledge of Ezra and Nehemiah and this part of history than you did before we started the class? I know I do. And I'm really glad that we have been studying this. It's been great for me. Chapter 6. I need 4 readers for chapter 6, 1 through 5. Who wants it? Corey's got 1 through 5. Mark, would you like to take 6 through 9? Nehemiah 6, 1 through 9, 10 to 14. Trish, you want to do that? You feel like reading? Okay. I never know who's going to have bronchitis. Barbara, would you like to read? Okay. You're normally down there with the 4 and 5-year-olds, but you can read for the adults tonight. It'll be okay if you want to. All right, we're reading tonight about, this is going to sound like deja vu when you hear it. Yes, we're ready.
When word came to Tobiah, Geshem the Arab, and the rest of our enemies that I had rebuilt the wall, and not a gap was left in it, though up to that time I had not set the doors and the gates, Sanballat and Geshem sent me this message. Come, let us meet together in one of the villages on the plain of Ono. But they were scheming to harm me, so I sent messengers to them with this reply. I am carrying on a great project and cannot go down. Why should the work stop while I leave it and go down to you? 4 times they sent me the same message, and each time I gave them the same answer. Then the 5th time, Sanballat sent his aide to me with the same message, and in his hand was an unsealed letter, in which was written, It is reported among the nations, and Geshem says it is true, that you and the Jews are plotting to revolt, and therefore you are building the wall. Moreover, according to these reports, you are about to become their king. I went too far, didn't I?
Oh, that's okay.
Sorry. You want me to keep going? Or?
No, and you have also appointed prophets to proclaim in Jerusalem concerning you. The king is in Judah. And now it will be reported to the king according to these reports. So come now, let us take counsel together. Then I sent a message to him saying, Such things as you are saying have not been done, but you are inviting them in your own mind, inventing them in your own mind. For all of them were trying to frighten us, thinking that they will become discouraged with the work and it will not be done. But now, O God, strengthen my hands. And when I entered the house of Shemai, son of Delahai, son of Ahithophel, who was confined at home, he said, Let us meet together in the house of God within the temple, and let us close the doors of the temple, for they are coming to kill you, and they are coming to kill you at night.
But I said, Should a man like me flee, and could one such as I go into the temple to save his life? I will not go in. Then I perceived that surely God had not sent him. He uttered his prophecy against me because Tobiah and Sanballat hired him. He was hired for this reason, that I might be frightened and again accordingly in sin, so that they might have an evil report in order that they could reproach me. Remember, O my God, Tobiah and Sanballat, according to these works of theirs, and also Noadiah the prophetess, and the rest of the prophets who were trying to frighten me.
So the wall was completed on the 25th of Elul in 52 days. When all our enemies heard about this, all the surrounding nations were afraid and lost their self-confidence because they realized that this work had been done with the help of our God. Also in those days, the nobles of Judah were sending many letters to Tobiah, and replies from Tobiah kept coming to them. For many in Judah were under oath to him, since he was son-in-law to Shechaniah, son of Ezra, and his son Jehohanan had married the daughter of Meshullam, son of Berechiah. Moreover, they kept reporting to me his good deeds and then telling him what I said, and Tobiah sent letters to intimidate me.
For the pronunciation of those names. I'm glad you don't have time to look through these texts to see any big names in there, because it's not like Billy Bob and Johnny Sue. And anyway, appreciate you all reading. What's going on in chapter 6? Does it look familiar at all? Trying to intimidate them, trying to bully them, trying to make them stop the work. This is the same thing that happened when, by the way, who were those guys that came down to rebuild the temple? Who was the governor? Zerubbabel. And the high priest was? No, that was the king. That's a good shot, though. You got one of those names down. Yeah. Joshua. Joshua was the high priest. Zerubbabel was the governor. They came to rebuild the temple. This is the same kind of stuff that happened letter after letter. And through the years that they were rebuilding, the same thing kept going on. It is as if you could lift this out of the 5th century BC and lay it over present day Middle East. It's the same kind of junk going back and forth. Politics, accusations. Who's really at fault when there's a rocket attack? Is it the Palestinians? Is it the Hamas? Is it the Israelis? Who's the bad guy? It's a mess. But we know in this case, God has sent these guys back to rebuild the temple, to rebuild the wall. We know this is of him, and so we know what's going on is a bunch of junk. What was the demand by Sanballat? What do you want to do? Come on out, meet with me. Yeah, come on, let's meet. I think it's interesting. I know this is just coincidence. I'm sure there's no providence to it at all. But where did he want to meet? Oh, no. Isn't that great? It's just like, well, I won't go into any more of these, but oh, no, not going to oh, no. He knew they were planning to harm him. This wasn't just some kind of a meeting to talk about what's going on. Certainly not to promote what's going on. This is a plan to harm him. So we sent messengers, and what did the messengers say? What message did they carry from him? I don't have time. Why should I? You need to justify why I should leave this important work of God and come down to meet with you. So he wasn't about to do that. How many times did Sanballat send this message? 4 times, and then a 5th time he sends his servant back in verse 5 with an open letter in his hand. What does this letter say? Yeah, you want to be king, and it's commonly reported. Everybody knows what you're trying to do. What is this? It's an accusation. What kind of an accusation? It's a false accusation. It is a lie. If you're a fan of The King and I with Yul Brynner, that particular edition of it, I like it when Yul Brynner, as the king, says, it is a lie. It is a false lie. I can't say it with his accent, but I thought that was pretty funny. That's my favorite line of the whole movie. Like, it's a double negative. Does that make it true if it's a false lie? But he's trying to emphasize with, this is a big lie. And tell me this stuff doesn't go on today. Lies. When you see what's coming out of Washington and when you see what's being said by the radio commentators, who do you believe? When you read what's in the papers, I think the best source is Facebook. Just read Facebook if you want to find out what's actually going on. Right. Okay. You can't believe either side. And I thought for a while there was this website called Snopes. Oh boy, if we go to Snopes and find it, you know it's right. No, afraid not. So, where do you go for truth? You go to the Bible. Now, fortunately or unfortunately, the Bible is not a source of modern truth for today as far as what is true. Some president says this, some prime minister says this, some accusation is made. Well, the Bible doesn't say which one of those is telling the truth. But what the Bible does do is tell us the truth that will last through the ages into eternity. And that's really the only thing that matters anyway. In a world where you don't even know if you're supposed to eat butter or not. We are? Okay. How about real butter. Now, does it matter? You see, here's the question for me. I believe real butter is good for you. I think it's healthy. And I'm not trying to get off onto some rabbit here. This I think applies. We're talking about some biblical principles here. But I don't trust butter that's been made with homogenized milk. What is homogenization? Okay, and what's the whole purpose of homogenization? Is that the only reason? Okay. Bottom line is it changes it. If you go to a cow and you get milk and you put that milk in your refrigerator, what are you going to find has happened to it when you come back to it later? It separates. That's what natural milk does. Homogenization, among other things, was to keep that from happening. In other words, it changes something. It's not like it was when God made it. And if you change something that God made, it's not going to be as good. It may even be harmful. Now, I'm not saying don't drink homogenized milk. And here's the crazy thing. In the United States of America, you can't go anywhere and buy real milk. Well, I think you can, but it's hard to do that because it is against the law to sell that kind of milk. At least it used to be. I knew a dairy farmer in Fort Collins, Colorado, years ago when we lived up there. And I asked him about that. Hey, I'd like to get some real milk. He said, I'm sorry, I can't sell it to you. It's against the law. What? What do you? It just struck me as like something out of outer space. That you couldn't go to a dairy farmer and buy milk straight out of a cow. You got to buy the cow, and now I'm reading this just this week in the news. The EPA is trying to gain control over backyard barbecues. Have you heard this? Tell me this is not a crazy world. It's like people are losing their minds. They've already lost their, okay, they're just groping around. This is the only truth that you can hang on to. Everything else is subject. It's liable to change. Bobby? Yes.
And you go out there and they would sell you eggs or they would sell you milk, but it had to be for your pets.
Really?
As long as it's for your pets. They could sell it to you. So, of course, people went out there and buy it. Is this for your pets? Oh yeah, and they would go home with their fresh milk and their fresh eggs.
Wow. You would lie to the office?
No, I didn't know.
What this is all about is Judaism, the temple, that's not even the reality. According to Hebrews, what is the temple? According to Hebrews, the temple is a shadow of the reality. And yet the devil is working through these guys to even keep that shadow from becoming present again in Jerusalem. If it is good, if it is of God, the devil is going to be against it. And he has all kinds of minions who don't even know that they're serving him. And this is the way it works in the world. John wrote, 1 John chapter 3 and verse 18. He said, do not marvel if the world hates you. Where did he get that? He got that from his Lord, from our Lord, from Jesus. He said, if they've called me Beelzebub, Lord of the flies, what are they going to call you? They're going to call you worse than that. So here's Nehemiah. He's come back. They're facing hardship. They've been threatened. They've been building, one hand on their building tools and another hand doing what? Holding a weapon. Didn't even take off their clothes at night. They sleep in their clothes because they didn't know when the battle trumpet might sound and they have to rise up and fight. That's how they lived. That's how they've been living. And now they're trying to draw him out so they can kill him, stop the work. He says, I'm not coming down to you. Why should I stop the work of God to come down to answer to your desires? That's a lesson for us. I've got a write-up in my office. The title of it is Keep About Your Work, Preacher. And essentially what it says is, don't chase the devil's rabbits. The devil will do everything in his power to keep you from doing your job of preaching the gospel. He'll malign your integrity. He'll get you off doing something else that you're not supposed to be doing. He'll have people throw stones and rocks and sticks and call you all kinds of names to keep you from, he'll get you to defend yourself rather than preach the gospel. Well, that's absolutely true. He'll do that with all of us. You don't have to be a preacher for that to happen to you. So if the devil can get us off track and off base, he will do it. That's what he's trying to do with Nehemiah. That's what he was trying to do with Jesus himself out in the wilderness. Spirit led him up into the wilderness after he was baptized, and what did the devil do? Hey, if you're the Son of Man, command that these stones be made bread. Oh, well, that didn't work. So what did he try next? Hey, let's go up on a pinnacle of the temple, cast yourself down, because the scripture says, your own Bible says, that he will give his angels charge over you and not allow you to dash your foot against a stone. Didn't work. Took him up onto a high place, showed him all the kingdoms of the world, said, if you'll bow down to me, you can have all this. Wow. There was a part of Jesus that wanted that. If there wasn't a part that wanted it, it wouldn't have been a temptation. But it didn't work. And the devil's still doing that to us today. Same thing, always. This is history. It's ancient history, but it's history that shows us that the same spiritual principles are at work in the world that have always been. And when you get started building something good, whether it's your family, your relationships at work, relationships at school, whatever you're doing that's good, the devil's going to try to stop it. So be advised. Bobby.
I always think about God knowing us well. The devil knows us well also. And he will attack us in whatever we're the weakest at. In other words, it could be through our family, our loved ones, or it could be this fact that we take a stand on something. As soon as we take a stand on something, he's going to come at him. And this is where he's at here. He's taking a stand, and they're coming at him.
All right. I might just have to have you all go on without me. So after Sanballat tries to get him to come down, and he won't come down, look what happens down in verse 10. When I entered the house of Shemaiah, the son of Delaiah, the son of Mehetabel, who was confined at home, he said, let us meet together in the house of God within the temple, and let us close the doors of the temple, for they're coming to kill you, and they're coming to kill you at night. Well, that makes sense. That sounds good. Here's a guy who's concerned over his safety. Where does he want him to hide? Let's go to the temple. Let's hide in the temple. I said, should a man like me flee? Could one such as I go into the temple to save his life? I will not go in. Look at verse 12. What does he realize in verse 12? God didn't send this guy. So he's getting this from Sanballat out here. He's getting this from Shemaiah in here. It's like there's bad guys everywhere. You really have to be careful who you listen to. Just because you think somebody is your brother and he'll give you good advice, that may be some of the worst advice. Thank you, brother. Next time, about half grape juice and what? Seriously, though, if you're having trouble like this, hey, a little grape juice and water's great. What's that? You like the grape juice too, huh, Shelley? No? No? Just the part about him being wrong about what he does, is that? Could have been better, bro. Thank you. Much appreciated. Donnie's always there for you. No joke about that. You see, the same principles are always at work. Verse 13, he was hired for this reason, that I might become frightened and act accordingly in sin, so that they might have an evil report in order that they could reproach me. When you are taking the lead, you've always got to be careful for people who want to find a way to weaken you, to pull you down. Remember when Paul wrote to the church at Ephesus, talked about the armor of God. What is the shield of faith for? What's it supposed to do? To quench all the fiery darts of the enemy. He's going to be throwing darts all the time, and he does. And it may be something just like this. And so Nehemiah says in verse 14, remember, O my God, Tobiah and Sanballat, according to these works. Sanballat was the bad guy outside the walls. Tobiah was right inside. Also Noadiah, the prophetess, and the rest of the prophets that were trying to frighten me. So there's a contingency of bad guys who were trying to mess things up. No different today. No different today. Let's pause for a moment here. Let's see, this, I've got 7 readings. The first one is a little bit lengthy, but we'll give it to Donnie because Donnie's a good reader. It's 1, 4 to 11. Nehemiah 1, 4 to 11, Donnie. And James, if you'll take chapter 2 and verse 4. Roy, you want to get 4, verses 4 and 5. Rich, chapter 4, verse 9. Who else we got? Steve, you want to take 5:19. Johnny, 6:9. Nehemiah, 6:9, yes. And then the one we just read from chapter 6, verse 14 is where we'll wind up. Everybody, if you remember the passages assigned, just go ahead and read those consecutively. And we'll start with chapter 1, verses 4 through 11.
These words and sat down and wept and mourned for days. And I continued fasting and praying before the God of heaven. And as I, God who keeps covenant and steadfast love, those who love him and keep his commandments, let your ear be attentive, your eyes open to hear the prayer of your servant, that I now pray before you day and night for the people of Israel, your servants, confessing the sins of the people of Israel which have sinned against you. Even I and my father's house have sinned. We have acted very corruptly against you and have not kept the commandments, the statutes, and the rules that you commanded your servant Moses. Remember the word that you commanded for the servant of Moses, saying, if you are unfaithful, I will scatter you among the peoples. But if you return to me and keep my commandments and do them, through your outcast and in the uttermost parts of heaven, from there I will gather them and bring them to the place that I have chosen, to make my name dwell there. They are your servants and your people, whom you have redeemed by the great power and by your strong hand. O Lord, let your ear be attentive to the prayer of your servant and to the prayer of the servants who delight to fear your name. And give success to your servant today. Grant him mercy in the sight of man. Now I was a cupbearer to the king.
Very good. Chapter 2, verse 4.
Then the king said unto me, for what dost thou make request? So I prayed to the God of heaven.
Very good. 4 through 5.
Hear
Very good. Chapter 4, verse 9.
And we pray to our God and set a guard as a protection against them day and night.
Chapter 5, verse 19.
Remember me with favor, my God, for all have done for these people, for all I have done for these people.
6:9.
For all of them were trying to frighten us, thinking they will become discouraged with the work, and it will not be done. But now, O God, strengthen my hands.
And then verse 14. Remember, O my God, Tobias and out according to these words of theirs. Also Noadiah the prophetess and the rest of the prophets who were trying to frighten me. What's the common element in every one of these passages? Nehemiah is praying. Every single one of these passages tell us that Nehemiah was a praying man. When he faced any kind of crisis, when he was troubled, he prayed. He prayed and he prayed. And it's not like there's a break in the text that says Nehemiah's prayer or anything like that. It's just like as a matter of course, as he moves from one thought to another, he prays. It just seems so natural to him to do this. This is something that would be easily overlooked in Nehemiah, and I know as I read through this, I thought, well, I think I read about him praying again. Well, how many passages did we just see? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 times before we're out of the 6th chapter, we've read about Nehemiah calling on God. Is there a spiritual lesson there or what? The same thing essentially is true when you read through the Gospels. I'll just make you mention of that. So next time you read through any one of the Gospels, look for how many times Jesus calls on God. All right. Verse 15, chapter 6, verse 15. The wall was completed on the 25th day of the month Elul in 52 days. When all our enemies heard of it and all the nations surrounding us, they lost their confidence when they recognized that this work had been accomplished with the help of our God. What about verse 17? Still sending those letters. Still sending those letters. Do you think at this point Nehemiah had been a faithful servant of the king that sent him? Absolutely. Back to that armor of God. What's the breastplate represented by in Ephesians chapter 6? The breastplate of righteousness. The breastplate of righteousness. How many politicians do you think would like to have that breastplate of righteousness? Here's what I mean by that. If you're going into politics, what are people going to start looking for? Flaws, anything that you've done wrong, any scandals. Matter of fact, it's so popular, there's even a TV show about that now. It's interesting if you want a cross-section of our culture, just look at some of the names of the TV shows. Pretty Little Liars, Desperate Housewives, Scandal, Revenge, Blacklist. I'm not saying all these are horrible programs, even though most of them are horrible programs. Wow, this is the stuff of what's going on in the world, and it's the same stuff that's back here. All right, verse 19. Moreover, they were speaking about his good deeds in my presence and reported my words to him, and then Tobiah sent letters to frighten me. It's over and over and over. There are people trying to undermine the work of God as being done through Nehemiah. Let's read some in chapter 7. Any questions, observations, or comments, though, about anything we've covered? Bobby?
He didn't take refuge in the temple.
Right.
Number one, he wasn't a priest.
Right.
So he couldn't go in there, and he knew that would be a sin. And secondly, with his prayers, we've been seeing he's putting his faith not in the building or in the process, but in God himself.
Right. When you put your faith in God, it's surprising, at least it has been to me when I read through the history that God provides for us here, what he has done that sometimes those who were being benefited by it didn't even know. Remember Elisha inside the city of Dothan when the Arameans had surrounded the city And he was up on the wall with his servant, and they looked out and they saw all the Arameans, and his servant said, "What are we going to do?" What did Elisha ask for God to do? Open his eyes. And when the Lord opened that servant's eyes, what did he see? He saw the fiery chariots of God, more than the Arameans, all over the place. Now, if God hadn't opened his eyes, he couldn't have seen them, but would they still been there? Well, of course. Of course they would have been there. Hebrews chapter 1, verse 14 talks about angels, and it talks about us. And it says, angels are God's messengers sent to minister to those who are heirs of salvation. Now, I don't have any real angel stories for you. Some people might have some angel stories as far as things happening, and they think somebody that they had contact with was an angel. But I think angels do a lot of things for us, and we don't have any clue whatsoever what they're doing. Most of my adult life, I have said, because I have believed, I really think I have been sustained by the prayers of my mother. And maybe some of you can look back on times and situations where you probably should have died, and you didn't, or something a lot worse than what happened to you should have happened to you, but it didn't. Why? I don't understand why. I don't know. But I know that God says he sends his angels to be ministers for us. And I know that in one night, this isn't the Elisha story, this is a different story. In one night, one of God's angels killed 180,000 Syrian soldiers. That's a lot of guys to die in one night at the hand of one angel. In one night, God sent his angel through Egypt at Passover night, and every firstborn in the land died. If God wants to preserve you like he did Nehemiah, he will preserve you. You don't have to take extreme measures doing things that you don't have a good conscience about. God will preserve you. And I want to sneeze. Yeah, really. Chapter 7. We will not read the entire chapter 7. That would be fun if you look at all those names. Here's what we'll do. We'll read verses 1 through 4. Who wants to do that? 1 through 4. Joe, you want to get 1 through 4 in chapter 7? All right. And then who wants 5 through 7 and 66? Corey, you want to get that? 5 through 7 and 66. And then we'll start with chapter 7, but we won't start. I'm sorry. Well, this will be tough. 5 through 7, and then verses 66 and 73. You taking notes? 66 and 70. Then we'll start in chapter 8. Let's go ahead and read this section of chapter 7, though.
When the wall was built, and I had set up the doors, and the porters, and the singers, and the Levites were appointed, that I gave my brother Hanai and Hananiah, the governor of the castle, charge over Jerusalem, for he was a faithful man, and feared God above many. And I said unto them, let not the gates of Jerusalem be open until the sun be hot, and while they stand on guard, let them shut the doors and bar ye them, and appoint watches of the inhabitants of Jerusalem, every one in his watch, and every one to be over against his house. Now the city was wide and large, but the people were few therein, and the houses were not builded. So my God put into my heart to assemble the nobles, the officials, and the common people for registration by families. I found a genealogical record of those who had been the first to return. This is what I found written there. These are the people of the province who came up from the captivity of the exile whom Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had taken captive. They returned to Jerusalem and Judah, each to his own town, in company with blah, 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 blah. Let's get down to this. He said 66, right?
Yes.
The whole company numbered 42,360, besides their 7,337 male and female slaves, and they also had 245 male and female singers. There were 736 horses, and skipped 73, right?
Yes.
The priests, the Levites, the gatekeepers, the musicians, and the temple servants, along with certain of the people and the rest of the Israelites, settled in their own towns. When the seventh month came, and the Israelites had settled in their towns.
Okay. Now, the only reason I wanted you to go up down to verse 7, who's in verse 7? Who's mentioned there? Zerubbabel and Joshua. Zerubbabel and Joshua. And Nehemiah is also mentioned, but I want you to especially see Zerubbabel and Joshua. This Nehemiah may not be the Nehemiah of this letter. I think that's an earlier Nehemiah. I couldn't prove that, but nobody can prove it's not either, so but the bottom line is, he found this record and he read this record, and what he's looking at, well, these are the guys who came before us. I don't know, because there's no note that says, here's what you're supposed to learn from this, Marty. But I think it is good for us to remember who came before us. Isn't this a nice building? Forget the building. Isn't this a great congregation? How did it get started? 1939? 2 years before the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. Some people got together here in Choctaw and they got this congregation started, and look where we are today. And it might not look much to some people, but it's a lot to me, and I think it's a lot to you. But we didn't cause this. Somebody else was here before us. Well, who made this whole thing possible but those who came before us to establish Oklahoma as a state? Because when did Oklahoma become a state? So, let's see, that's 32 years? Only 32 years after we became a state did this congregation get started. Well, how did Oklahoma become a state? Well, there were some other states established first. It's fascinating. There was a guy, see how I learned this on YouTube, not YouTube, Facebook. See all these interesting things on Facebook. Anybody else see this thing? It's a history thing, and this guy said, what's the most important date in American history? Is that when you were born? You see how you know things after a while. You just know where it's going to come from. And of course, you're going back through what little you know of American history, trying to figure out important dates. This guy goes back to I forget what the year was now. I should have written it down, but it's a really interesting thing if you see it. 15-something, and what happened in 15-something was the King of Spain was going to attack and overwhelm England, and he had the power to do it. But what happened to the Spanish Armada? Long story short, it was basically wiped out by a storm, and so the Spanish did not overwhelm England. If the Spanish had overwhelmed England in the late 1500s, who would never have come to America? The Pilgrims and Jamestown. None of that would have ever happened if that had happened, and it looked like politically and militarily and financially it could easily have happened, because by that time England had gone Protestant. And so the King of Spain had the support of the Catholic Church, the powerful and wealthy Catholic Church, because the Pope wanted England back for the church. So he was willing to support the King of Spain to go and make war on England to bring them back into the dominance of the Catholic Church. Didn't happen. Now, you and I might say, it's an accident or a coincidence that there was a storm, but we couldn't prove one way or the other, could we? But God is always working in history. God is working here. We know he's working here because he's saying so. I believe things like this that are continually telling us how God works in history are to help us understand that when we see things go on that we don't have any real explanation for, but that seem to follow through with good things coming, it's probably God. What's that? The Mormons? Oh, that's right.
That when God destroyed the flood, that the Mormon people, God had them to make ships that went under the ocean, and those stones that light up that they have in the temple up there led the way.
That was the house. These round ships.
That's what he said.
Yeah, well. That was before they knew anything about archaeology, because I asked a couple of elders about that. Yeah. Well, I've asked them, I said, how about, why hasn't archaeology turned up any evidence of this great, huge battle with thousands of chariots and swords and armor and shields and castle walls? Where's the archaeological evidence for any of that? And the answer is, there is none. You see, when you read in here that these guys made up these laws, these lies, it is reported among the nations, and Gashmu says, Gashmu must have been their answer for Oprah or something, I don't know. You and the Jews are planning to rebel, therefore you're rebuilding the wall and you're to be their king according to these reports. Nothing but lies. Nothing but lies. But if the devil can ensnare us with a lie, he doesn't have any qualms about using a lie. He's the father of lies, as Jesus said. And Paul wrote to Timothy and talked about doctrines of demons, teachings that come from demons. He wrote about the schemes of the devil that are well laid out. He's not dumb. He knows what he's doing, and he's doing it all the time, and that's all he has to do. But we know what the outcome's going to be, so hang in there. Love you guys. Thanks for being here tonight. Oh, Trish, you got a question or comment? I don't know. There are names in here that are the same names as other people, and it's impossible to tell who they are unless there's something in the text that dictates. And that's, if it said Mordecai, the son of somebody, that would be one thing, but it just says Mordecai. I don't know. There's your research question for next week. Is that the same Mordecai? But it's the same time frame, similar time frame. All right, thank you. Class dismissed.